right. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Satori Experience. I'm Damien, your co-host, along with
Neil.
Neil.
Hey guys.
And this is the Expert Edition, where we deep dive on topics that can help you gain enlightenment, empowerment, basically Satori experiences. And today we have our special guest, a medically trained integrated practitioner, Shahin Kazemzadeh.
For people meeting you for the first time, how would you describe what you do?
So I like to work with consciousness, and the way I got into that initially was through medical school, where I experienced a lot of burnout, and kind of that experience taught me a lot about who I was and who I wasn't, and who I was pretending to be. And I suppose through initially a Vipassana experience in 2016, I kind of had a kind of flip and an experience where my sense of worldview shifted. And kind of that was the beginning of me getting a sense of who I was at a deeper level. And so there's been a professional element, but then there's been a lot of personal exploration of consciousness. And that initially at some point was through psychedelic medicines in my early 20s. And then it was through the process of meditation, grounding, different spiritual practices, the study of trauma, and the study of different religious texts, philosophies. And there was an attempt to bring all those different systems together. So it is a big story in terms of the things I've been through, but my work now is to try and bring all of that together into a unified system.
So, can you share this unified system tool for us?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a big system, but it depends on where we start from. However, what I'll say is that I've put it down to a five-body approach. So in yoga tradition, they talk about the different aspects of the psyche as bodies. And so we have the physical body, and then obviously we need to also consider the emotional body that builds onto the thinking body, the energetic body, and the spiritual aspect. Each one is referred to as a body because it has its own systems and processes. So how you deal with the body would be different to how you deal with your emotions. The body might require movement and shaking, whereas the emotions might require breathing and writing. And so each one has its own different component. And so this is looking at all five levels, and in that way trying to address disease through that process. Because when something happens at one level, it will actually affect the things on the other level.
Yeah.
So as an example, during medical school, I found out that I was diagnosed with a chronic autoimmune disease that I was told was incurable by 10 different specialists.
Yeah.
Had 2 surgeries for it. And eventually I realized that the core of an autoimmune disease is that in autoimmune disease, the body is attacking itself.
Yeah.
But then when I went into the mental layer, the way that reflected was that I had a self-critical thinking. I had self-critical thinking
Yeah, that makes sense.
where my own thinking was attacking itself. And so when your thoughts are attacking themselves, then your body responds in a similar way
Yeah.
and begins to attack itself. And so the healing of that required me to go into all those other levels and notice where I was attacking myself, where I was being destructive with my thinking and patterns and behaviors, and to shift that. And it's definitely a bit of a slow process to go through all those different levels, but change can happen in an instant. In an instant.
That's fascinating because, like, we're taught by the medical system that autoimmune diseases are incurable and that you can't really do much about it. So it's fascinating how you actually talk about how you attack it on different levels or bodies, as you say, and it's most of the time, autoimmune disease. The doctors will tend to attack it from like a pharmaceutical kind of just like put drugs into, and then but you're going from like a mental point of view, an energetic point of view, like. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, was that one of the first instances when you realized the things that you were studying weren't the complete answer? It was just part of an answer. Was that part of your Like, maybe a little bit more about. Tell us a bit more about how you got into medicine. Like, what got you in there? Love to hear more about why you chose to study to be a doctor.
Sure. I mean, one of the initial things was that I think when I was in my, early years, when I was about 10, my mother had some heart issues. And I remember a moment where we had the paramedic come in and I felt very helpless and vulnerable in that moment. And so I think one of the reasons I got into med was that I wanted to feel a sense of power in those situations. I didn't want to feel that kind of helplessness, and I wanted to be able to help and heal those who needed it. And so that was maybe one of the initial things that kind of led me into it. And I think obviously even through it, and this was part of my own patterns that I realized in hindsight, there was an element of me trying to prove to myself or prove to society myself and my value. And so there was kind of a mixture of reasons, all in together. But definitely, I was very much fascinated by the sciences, and I wanted to do something that was helpful at a collective level, and I wanted to push myself to do as much as I could. And so that's what was one of the first things that led me into med.
You seem like someone that's very spiritual at the same time very scientific. So where would you say you kind of fit? Like, how did the two kind of modalities or kind of ends of the spectrum come together?
Mm. So I grew up fairly religious and fairly orthodox, and that the religious conditioning and program is actually part of the trauma that needs to be deconditioned. But that gave me an insight into the spiritual realm. In that way, I was open and comfortable to it. But then when I got into med school, I became highly scientific and I more or less became atheistic and rejected all spirituality. It just didn't seem valid to me at that point. And so I became very scientifically minded. But then because of that, I kind of lost myself in the process. I became very depressed. I became very obsessive or compulsive. And for me, success became the sole area of my focus. And so then I suppose that burnout got me to the point, especially with the autoimmune disease, got me to the point where I almost had no choice but to turn to spirituality. I had seen all the different doctors, and no one and nothing could help. And I had this memory of reading about or hearing about miracle healings and miracle cures of people having cancers and then having spontaneous remissions. And so at that time, I really needed a miracle. And so I thought to myself, if this was true, then what would the mechanism be? And so from doing, eventually getting into meditation work, I got to kind of experience that space of spirituality, which I really saw was our inner world that we need to sense, not through our five senses, but we have a different sense. Scientifically, it's called interoception, our ability to sense the feelings and sensations inside. And so by going through that kind of, I suppose, Buddhist process of meditating, I was able to, over time, understand that the things that I've learned from mythology, religion, and scriptures actually had a rationale. Initially, I saw the rationale, I saw beyond the methodology, and I saw the principle. And then eventually I thought to myself, if some of these conversations that we hear in mythology about miracles, if any of them are true, then they need to be true in the basis of physics, in the basis of how reality actually works. And so, having had studied some quantum physics, I started to really sit with the principles and really consider how does it work at the level of the body? Because I wanted to see, can I ground the spirituality into the physical? And basically, this has been a slow process of 8 to 9 years of taking all the little different principles, understanding how the systems of the body work, and understanding that, in essence, spirituality is the science of how the body works, the science of how the psyche works.
Trying to internalize that. So spirituality is the science of how the body works. Is that what you just said?
I did say that. I did
Okay.
say that. It's better framed as the it's the workings of the body and it's the mechanics of the body, but it's really in a way the way I see it is that the psyche and the body are one and the same.
Yeah.
It's a holistic approach to it, as
It's a
opposed to the medical profession treats it very materialistically, right? So we treat things that we can see as opposed to the unexplainable, like your miraculous healing. And I think that's where I come from, very much on the spiritual side. I feel like science hasn't caught up with those things. And what did it feel like for you to have that moment of, whoa, this is like the things I've been believing, the things my beliefs have been turned around. Like for you, how did it feel for you, mentally, emotionally, physically, when you realized there was more to science?
Well, I've gone through all the different possibilities of emotions and experiences, and but I'd say initially there was a sense of just these big epiphanies of realizing, holy shit, everything that I've been taught that I'd rejected actually makes sense in this way. And so there was a making, I was beginning to make more sense of how everything worked. And there were a lot of releases because, I mean, there were moments of intense grief and intense sadness, remembering where, I might have acted out of character or out of integrity or things that I've lost, the hurts. And so, but that is in a way altogether, in the end, whilst challenging at first, is a beautiful experience of taking the pain, learning from it, and once you learn from your pain, the pain becomes the thing you care about. It becomes the purpose that moves you. It's almost like a trapped part of your energy, a life force, that when released adds to the vitality that you have.
I'd like to talk more about like the practical aspect of it. So like, have you had any clients recently that went through this five body reintegration system, as you
So
told me?
the five body integration system is more of a framework and a philosophy. And it would be used to shape or be an adjunct to Western medicine and would be an attempt, one of first attempts, to try and bring Western medicine, ancient wisdom, and emerging technologies all together. And so it is an ongoing working project of then having people on board, having things tested and validated in the same way the pharmaceutical companies test and validate. And so it's an ongoing process. In itself would be a 2-year mentorship
Okay.
that would be for those who are very committed to the process of full awakening and needing it all in one comprehensive system to guide them through the nuances of all the different sections of the body that need to be integrated. In terms of specifics, for example, I had a client that I was working with who had a cocaine addiction. And my client was very much adamant that his problem was the cocaine addiction. And then what I told him, and Dr. Gabor Mate says this as well, and he says that addiction is never the problem. Addiction is always the solution.
Wow. Write that down.
That really the problem is the internal pain that we have, which is really an unmet need, right? It could exist at the five levels, the spiritual, emotional, psychological. But once we learn to recognize that pain and meet that need, then that pain, it's almost like a ball of energy internally. As that ball of energy reduces in size, then the need to escape, the craving to escape reduces.
That's fascinating.
When we have the craving to escape, it's because we're trying to run away from a pain that we don't have the skills to meet. So there's a knowledge gap and a skill gap that we haven't learned. So maybe the skill gap is I don't know how to make myself feel safe. Maybe it's that I don't feel a sense of connection, don't feel a sense of love for myself. And so by getting clear on that, there would be, I suppose, different modalities that could be used to treat that. But just very simply put, most of the modalities at the level of the body, we've got movement that can be used. Movement in the same way that when you have an animal in the wild and they see a threat, they'll freeze. But afterwards, when the threat's gone, they'll shake. That shaking
Yeah.
is the releasing of that nervous energy that humans, because of social programming, we don't do because it's embarrassing or whatever reason else. Then we've got breath. That's also very powerful. Breathing is really the anchor between the unconscious mind and the conscious mind. It's what allows us to literally move that energy, awareness and breath that allows things to move. And then, sounds, music, all that is vibration. That really it kind of connects us back to a harmonic state. So music, especially music that's rhythmic, is going to be harmonic. It's going to have a certain predictable pattern. It's in coherence. That's what we would say.
Mm.
Nature is in coherence, trees. And so the reason when we go outside, we feel better in nature is that our field of energy kind of connects to that coherent energy and synchronizes with that. And so we connect to that coherence. And so, yeah, I suppose, yeah, movement, breath, and music would be key ways.
So would you be advising someone to do all those different modalities, or like specific ones, or how would they know what to do? There's so much like information out there. So you needed breath work, you needed ice baths, you need like I don't know,
I mean,
mushrooms.
I guess we've tried a lot of these things. Is there one that you'd recommend to start with, or does it really depend on where the person is on their journey?
Hmm. It's a hard question to answer, but I'll try my best. So I like to take a hyper personalized approach that, in the same way that someone would say, hey, are you religious at all? And I'll say, no, I've got a certain perspective on that. But if I was to advise it for someone, I'd say whatever works for them, right? If someone has a Islamic background, if that works for them, good. If someone has is Jewish, that works for them, great. As long as they have a framework. But in terms of practices, it's the same way. Working with the body, it could be that someone works at the gym and that is effective for them. But there certainly should be a physical training component. But whether that's gym, whether that's dance, whether that's qigong, it's really about the person doing something that feels good to them, that they like doing. Because really part of this process, because it can be a very difficult process, is enjoyment. And is that is enjoyment, and is that we need to learn how to master these particular skills. So there's the physical component, and well, I typically would advise people to try and learn how to meditate or do some kind of mindfulness practice. And that might just really mean learning how to still your mind. Because even a creative act, if someone's painting and they're completely in the flow of that, that's still a meditative practice. You don't have to be sitting there for that to be a thing. That, nature, and there's a variety of modalities. I generally would advise people to just try what comes to them and to stick to one or two and really get good at those particular practices.
I guess on our first episode of our podcast, we had Lauren on, and she talked about an inability to open her heart. And what would you say would be? Is there a practice that you would advocate in terms of opening her heart? I know she loved to run. One of the things was like she was a runner, but she was injured. So the thing that helped her connect with nature and the body component was limited. So what advice would you give to Lauren if she was here now?
So I'd say with the heart, it's got a physical component. You need to get blood flow. So running in itself is going to be good to open up the heart. There are Taoist practices, certain movements of, when you're opening your hands and you're shaking and moving, that helps open the heart. But then at the emotional level, often grief, unprocessed losses will get in the way. And so there's an element of doing grief work and working with past pains, things that we don't necessarily want to look at. Someone might do this through writing, they might talk to a friend, they might talk to a counselor. And the end goal of that would be some kind of forgiveness work, especially when we're working with the heart. And what I like to say usually about forgiveness is that I found for me that forgiveness wasn't something that we can just do by choice. Not necessarily. We can sometimes do that, but forgiveness I found was something that happens spontaneously once understanding happens. So what I did in the process of forgiving my own father in the blame that I had towards him was that I just simply meditated on my father and his life and the challenges he'd been through. And I really tried to put myself in his shoes. And once I did that at the kind of somatic feeling level, there was a point that I got to where I'm like, there's no need to forgive him. There's nothing to forgive because I could see that he was just repeating a pattern that was given to him, that there was pressure that the culture put on him, and then he put that pressure on me. But it wasn't really that it was him trying to abuse or hurt me. It was that he was trying to prepare me, and he was doing it unconsciously. And so, really, this is, I guess, a kind of multimodal approach. But by doing the forgiveness work, visualization work, it can really help open the heart and help it release. And then,
After Lauren, we have Jacinta. Jacinta was quite hard on herself. And yeah, so what are you like? Where does that come from? Like, because I think a lot of people have that kind of mentality where they're like perfectionists and they have to get things right. So where does that come from? And how do we fix that?
depends on how deep we want to go. But the origin of that would be when we're growing up with our family, what will happen is that you can have certain families where children are loved unconditionally and they're accepted exactly as they are. Then they will go and develop a secure attachment style. They feel safe in themselves. But then there are families, and most families are like this, where there are certain expectations of performance. This is good, this is bad, you need to act this kind of way. And that style of upbringing usually means that children associate love with conditions. I have to be a certain way in order to be loved. And love can then become performative. People trying to prove themselves in different ways, trying to fit in. That's all part of the fact that I have to be a certain way in order to fit in. So that's the kind of origin of when we really stop loving ourselves. Because what happens is that when our family rejects us, or maybe I'm an expressive person and they're like, this is inappropriate, that judgment gets registered as this part of me, this energy in me is unacceptable. And so for me, when I'm a child, I've got the choice between being authentically myself or having that safe, secure attachment, the bond that I have with my family. And so as a young child, we'll inevitably choose the attachment with family and then reject ourselves in the process. So it's safer for a child to say that I'm the bad one, they're the good one, my family is the good one, because that maintains that attachment, keeps them safe. So in that way, that becomes an internalized self-judgment that we kind of carry throughout, and we continue to repeat it because for us, that is the protection mechanism that we have against criticism and judgment. Because if I judge myself harshly, then it leaves little room for someone else to judge me. And so then it just becomes a mind pattern where we think that if I push harder, put more pressure, then I'm going to perform better. But then in the transformation space, we find that really it's your ability to be gentle with yourself that allows the healing to happen. For you to be able to see your own humanity, for you to be able to remove the condition that you use against yourself, and to be able to have almost two separate parts where you can love yourself deeply, where you love yourself for who you are, like your essence, that's unchangeable, an inherent love that you have, unconditional. And then you might have the part of you that's the performer. Like you still need to work hard and meet certain metrics and build skills and capabilities. But just because you say perform badly on one day, it doesn't mean that you're going to love yourself any less. If your self-esteem or love for yourself changes on a day-to-day basis based on how well you perform, that's telling you that your self-love is linked to your performance, that your love for yourself is conditional. Did I do good or did I not do good?
Jin, for people first hearing about the 5-body reintegration system, can you give us a really simple elevator pitch describing the 5 bodies?
All right. So the 5 bodies begins with the spiritual body. That's your map of meaning, your life philosophy, and the religious background you would have had, whether it's spiritual or whether you're more faith oriented, will all play into that. Because the meaning you give to the world then leads to your energetic body, how much life force you have. These are the energetics of relationships, your community, all connecting to it. Then that leads to your thoughts and your thought patterns. The amount of energy and state you have lead to those kinds and styles of thinking. That then leads to the kinds of emotions you experience, repression patterns that you might have, your emotional profiling. And based on your emotions, that leads to the actions that you take, the physical body, and the life that you create.
Right. On our second episode of our podcast, we had our guest, Jacinta, and she talked about really being self-critical. How would you apply the 5-body system and framework to people who are too hard on themselves?
Okay, so in terms of being self-critical, at the spiritual level, the map of meaning, it's how you see yourself relative to the world. And so, for example, do you believe in a God? What's your concept of that word? And so everyone might have a different sense of that. Someone might say the universe, someone might say source, someone might just believe in something else. And so you might then consider relative to that, is me being self-critical, is it helping me relative to my life path, or is it taking away from me? In terms of the energetic layer, your life force, you're then paying attention to what gives you energy, quite literally. So when you're being self-critical, do you feel better or do you feel deflated? The people you surround yourself with, the communities that you're in. And so by being around people who are uplifting, you're then able to kind of shift things at that energetic layer. Then in terms of the mental patterns, this is the thoughts that you have, the beliefs that you have, and also your worldviews. And so with being self-critical specifically, we're working to, I suppose, debunk those negative beliefs and challenge them. This is kind of the CBT style of work. And exactly, and working to see whether the beliefs are helpful or not. If there's any truth to it, if there's any logic to it. Because usually beliefs that are false will be partial truths. They'll be true in some situations, but not all situations. And so if you kind of dig into beliefs that are false, you can kind of dismantle them in that way. Then at the emotional layer, we'd be working usually with a suppressed emotion that our body doesn't feel safe enough to feel. So with being self-critical, you'd be self-critical so that it prevents you from doing something embarrassing or dumb, so you don't have to feel a sense of shame or guilt. So you'd be training your body to feel safe, to feel shame or guilt, to maybe even debunk that so you don't feel shame or guilt. So instead, you just, hey, if something goes wrong, you just take action instead of going into a loop of negativity. And then finally, with the physical layer, as we said before, movement is also what allows us to shake off those emotions. But body is also to do with touch. So really people do all kinds of practices, self-touch practices in terms of self-massage, but also
Not that kind of self-massage.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's your thing.
There's a variety of practices, and that could be a conversation for something different time. But yeah, just being good to yourself, diet, nutrition.
Right. So something
exercise.
like when you exit the bathroom, instead of like what I used to do was like really just rough house myself. I want to be as quick and as clean as possible. And nowadays I gently tap myself as I exit the shower. Is that a good example of something that you would do? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Think of the 5 love languages, right? And try and show yourself love in all those different categories, right? It's one is touch, right? Words of affirmation. So speaking good to yourself, the self-talk. Then gifts. Buy yourself something nice, right? And then you've got quality time. Spend time with yourself where it's just you in solitude, doing something that is meaningful, getting deep. And what was the last one?
Acts of service.
Acts of service. And so, yeah, doing kind things for yourself. If you're like planning for your future, that's an act of service. And so that would be one way to kind of apply it through that other framework.
So one of the questions we usually ask our guests is, if your life was a book or movie, what would it be?
Okay, so I'd like to be Luke Skywalker from
Okay.
Star Wars. And so the way I see it is that the system that we're in right now, the civilization that's been built through a variety of groups over millennia, is a lot like the Empire that has a certain group at the very top that is controlling the masses using mind control, mass hypnosis programming that has created these self-critical beliefs that we're talking about. And so we'll see. So my process is is really understanding all of how the mass programming works and really learning how to deprogram the minds so that we can return back to our original essence because our soul is untarnished. Our soul is very powerful. Our soul is very great. And through that access, we can tap into an infinite well of love, energy, and creativity. And so I'm on the journey to try and, collaborate with people and make that happen.
Is Jedi
Yeah. We'll form the Jedi Council.
Yeah. You can be Yoda.
Yoda?
I'll be Obi-Wan Kenobi. So no, that was great. That was very enlightening. I was like, yeah, I learned a lot just from listening to the talk. And yeah, so for those that want to get to know more about what you do and want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
They can get onto my Instagram
Yep.
at Shahin with two N's underscore MD. And then I've linked on that the different kinds of pages or ways for people to access me.
We'll have that in the show notes below that I'll have to work on, but that sounds good. And one final thing, if you were to give someone like some advice about how to reach their own Satori moments, this whether that's using 5-step reintegration system, what would you give?
So I'd say often in life, I try and separate between the pattern and the person, right? The personality we have is often the patterns we've learned that we use to protect ourselves. Often our personality is just a set of protective patterns. The person is the essence of who you are. And so, what I would say, obviously, your audience is on the path of learning. And so, learning and understanding is going to be very important. That's what the system's for. So, you get a whole holistic understanding of how everything kind of interrelates. But what I would say is a kind of pattern disruption. So, whether it's, I myself did the 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat, and just disrupting that usual pattern helps you reconnect to who that person is. But I've had other friends who've gone for like a 30-day hike, walking in Spain, someone going traveling. Anything that's a pattern disrupt can help you reconnect to your source essence. And with enough time, reflection, understanding, then they can make it happen.
Love it. It lines up with our decode, disrupt, design framework that we use. So, yeah, we're in synchronicity here.
So yeah, thank you so much for being on the Satori Experience, and you'll probably see a lot more Shaheen coming up. Got a wealth of knowledge and wisdom. So stay tuned and see you in the next show.